Be Afrocentric. Celebrate who you are.
So they've spotted a suspect boat and they're heading out to intercept it.
Victoria Nuland, no less, turned up in Niger and badgered the military government there to change course on what it was doing. And I can remember that we were saying at the time that this was extremely unwise, that it would make the new government in Niger feel that the Americans were hostile.
What's going on in Africa? What's going on, America? America is getting kicked on the continent of Africa. France has been a football kicked about the last few months, especially the last 1 year. But while all this is happening, African Americans, Africans of diaspora from Britain, from the Caribbean, from across the world, are moving to Africa. They're moving to Ghana, they're moving to South Africa, they're moving to Kenya, they're moving to Gambia, Tanzania, Uganda, all these places. So there is definitely a shift in the world. Sam Cooke said, man, change is going to happen. It's happening, my people. It may be slow coming, but the change is happening. And why is America getting kicked out of Africa? Its military, its influence, waning on the continent, and other powers are rising on the continent. Let's check out this video. Let's have a candid conversation because it's a moment that cannot be ignored. Check this out.
So this is big news. The collective West, the U.S., Europe, they're definitely retreating.
Yes, I think they are retreating. I mean, it's not yet a complete and total rout, but Niger was important. It was, of course, it's a key state in Central Africa, Western Africa. It has large uranium resources, as we all know, but it also had, I believe, 2 American bases, as well, of course, as the French bases. Now, as we discussed at the time, when there was the coup in Niger that overthrew the government, the pro-Western government, and brought the present military leadership to power, the Niger military at that time were quite straightforwardly hostile to France, but they were not necessarily hostile to the United States. Many of them had been trained in the United States. And it was possible, one could see a situation where the Niger military government gets rid of the French, but the Americans are allowed to stay, and of course the Russians can come in also, but they have relationships continuing with both powers at the same time. And I think that was an option. And then if you remember, the Americans backed the French, tried to get the Niger military to change course. Victoria Nuland, no less, turned up in Niger and badgered the military government there to change course on what it was doing. And I can remember that we were saying at the time that this was extremely unwise, that it would make the new government in Niger feel that the Americans were hostile, and it could, in fact, destroy the relationship between this government and the US. And that appears to be what has happened. Now, the Americans have dragged their feet. There's been complex negotiations. The government wants the Americans to leave. The State Department initially said that they would leave. The Pentagon has tried to negotiate extensions. There have been a few extensions, but the long and the short of it is it does seem as if they're leaving. So the entire Western position in Niger, a key country, has collapsed, and Niger is now firmly aligning itself with Mali and Burkina Faso, its 2 West African allies. Those countries have close relations with both China and Russia. They're looking increasingly to the Wagner organization to provide them with the military advice and technical assistance that the French and Americans used to provide. It's probably not been overlooked in West Africa that since the Wagner organization took over in Mali, the Mali military has won a string of successes against the various Islamist insurgencies in the north, which the French seemed unable to defeat. So we can see why Niger might be happy to make that kind of decision and get its hands freed from both the French and from the Americans. So that's Niger. But of course, what's also happening is that this is now becoming infectious. We see Chad. They've been talking about wanting the Americans to leave as well. The Americans also have bases in Chad. The Americans are trying hard to negotiate to keep those bases. The Chad government at the moment is still saying they want them to leave. There's talk that some kind of a negotiation is going to take place in order to enable the American troops to stay. If they do stay, which at the moment is far from certain, the government of Chad is going to exact a much higher price at the very least. They've obviously taken inspiration from what Niger has done. And the Americans, it looks like they're preparing for the collapse of their bases in this part of West Africa. So they've now contacted the very reliable pro-Western ally that has always existed, Côte d'Ivoire, and they're apparently now talking about setting up a base there. So they seem to be pulling out of the West African countries that adjoin the Sahel, and they're moving towards Côte d'Ivoire, which is somewhat further away from the Sahel, on the coast. It would be a different location and a different logistical operation completely. And the countries of the Sahel, by contrast, appear to be turning now increasingly to Russia and China.
African countries are increasingly becoming wary of the presence of Western troops in their nations, the influence of Western powers in their political and economic affairs. And France has particularly been guilty of this. The French Afric policy has ensured that France has had a chokehold of the West African states that were former colonies of France. And part of that has been maintained through the CFA franc, which is a currency in operation within some of these West African countries and supported by the French state. These countries also still have to have a reserve within the French central bank, which limits their access, their use, and they even borrow their own money at commercial rates. It's the most ridiculous thing anywhere in the world. France has attempted, unsuccessfully so, decades after independence, to ensure that their tentacles within West African states continue. They continue to get resources from West Africa. Uranium, for example, from Niger, powers the French state. Electricity within their homes, a good amount of it comes from nuclear plants that are supported by uranium from Niger. But travel down to Niger, and the sorry state of affairs, there are Nigerians who have grown up, never been able to turn on a switch, never had power within their homes. So you have young families and children who are growing up in this century who do not have access to the most basic of amenities, while their own resources power another nation. How immoral is that? Little wonder that the coups that have happened within West Africa have all pointed towards one country, France. And Macron is now saying that Europe, France by extension, is at a point of falling apart because their access to some of these vital resources is no longer guaranteed. America is following suit, and even as that happens, you will note something, that the powerful America, the all-powerful and mighty America, is being pushed out of Africa, while African Americans, Europeans of African descent, are now traveling to the continent, are moving back home, or relating with the countries in Africa, investing, pilgrimaging to Africa. Something totally unprecedented in the many decades before. Africa has never experienced this kind of influx of its lost children who are coming from the diaspora. And they are welcome to come. And we encourage that you do come. You will meet challenges in Africa, but this is home. Continental Africans are going through the same. But it is the opportunity to work together to build something for the black nation. So despised, the brown people of this world, so despised out there. But partly because we have failed to organize ourselves. The opportunity to organize is here. The journey to Africa is happening. So Africans of diaspora and continental Africans will have to take advantage of that change that is happening. The new world order will happen in its own space, but within that same world order is the rise of African people saying it is our time to also make good use, to reconnect with our brothers and sisters out there. And Africa is very, very resourceful. You're talking about raw materials, but you're also talking about human resource. Human resource both on the continent and outside the continent. We've got Africans of diaspora, those born out there, who are leading industries in the West, who are inventors, who are owners of sports organizations, leaders in fashion, culture, talk about music, sports. The African nation is a powerhouse in a lot of these sectors. That same energy needs to be harnessed and utilized on the continent of Africa, so that Africans, wherever you are, you can stand tall and proud. Be Afrocentric. Celebrate who you are.
Thank you so much.
But manage yourselves better, manage ourselves better and our resources so that we can stand proud, we can be respected. And the rush to Africa should not only be by Westerners. It is also an opportunity for Africans of diaspora to embrace the continent slowly and surely. The French will exit, America will exit, but you have to remember that it is the states and their center governments that are exiting. Africa still relates with nationals of countries in France, in the US, in Britain. And generally the ordinary folk can connect in those terms. But at the state level, a good majority of countries would do anything just to self-preserve their nations at the expense of others. And that is the fate that has faced Africa for the longest time. We're still finding exploitation happening in places like Congo, in Zimbabwe. And it is largely because those who are in charge in Africa are failing to seize the moment and realize that they're holding positions of responsibility for their nationals, not for themselves, not for their families and their small cocoon of power elite who are driving Africa to the ground. If this resonates with you, you are Afrocentric, and Africa, you truly believe in your heart, is your business. Like, subscribe, and share. Let's connect you to the continent. Let's celebrate Africa. Let's work as a nation of Africa, wherever you are in this world. This is Afrocentric. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you for subscribing and sharing and liking. And we'll see you again in the next video. Many thanks.